Welcome to this week's episode of Virtually Amazing Assistants, the podcast for assistants everywhere. And this week, I am delighted to have as my guest the amazing Gayle Thompson. Now, Gayle is actually a trainer. She's not an assistant. We can talk about how she became a trainer and what she does as we go through. And it's a bit self indulgent for me to talk to a fellow trainer as well. So we can have a bit of a natter about the training world and it's what's going on there. So let me tell you about Gayle and why I wanted to have her on the podcast. So Gayle has got over 25 years of learning and development experience, and she's moved around a variety of different training fields. I'm very intrigued by the criminal justice one, employability, leadership, which we'll talk about a bit later, communications and behavior. So it means that she can kind of do just about anything, really, I think. Superwoman. And she's also really creative. She does some good drawings and things, which I can't do, but there you go. And also, she is a virtual producer. And that's kind of where we're going to start because I want to talk about what a virtual producer is, having done some of that myself recently. So, Gayle, have I missed anything from your bio there?
Gosh, what an introduction. I feel like not all heroes wake up. But yes, hello to all of Shelley's listeners. I'm Gayle Thompson. I'm owner and founder of VILT, that's Virtual Instructor-Led Training Solutions. I'm currently recording this podcast from my home office in Aberdeen, Scotland, but we're virtual. So who knows where I'll
Yeah.
be by the time this podcast goes out.
Yeah. And this podcast, if I look at my spreadsheet, because I'm always going to have a spreadsheet, aren't I? Gayle is going to be on the 25th of March. This will go live. I've been very fortunate to have a long list of people who wanted to come and talk to me for some reason. So it's got to be scheduled. And that's the thing that assistants are really good at. They're really good at putting things into a process and getting them out there and making them happen. So, Gayle, let's start with something that I find quite interesting, your time in the criminal justice system. I want to tell our
Oh,
listeners a little bit about that because I think they all love to hear the stories behind the people.
I worked in the criminal justice sector for years. I've worked in prisons. I've worked with people who have been on community sentences. So that's when you're sentenced, but you're not put into custody. So you would do something like community service, similar sort of thing. I've worked with people coming through the mental health services, the addiction services, etc. So I'm kind of used to those challenging environments. I've worked in the oil and gas, which is even more challenging. I've worked on farms, in laboratories, and like you said, Shelley, I've delivered a whole range of training. But prior to that, because I'm a lady of a certain age, prior to becoming a trainer, I was actually in admin and IT.
Oh,
So
I
they've
didn't
all
know
kind
that.
of they've all kind of come together. So for your admin assistants, your PAs, your VAs, etc., I've been where you are, having to learn new tools. In fact, that was my first training gig was, believe it or not, being a Microsoft trainer for scientists
Oh,
because
wow, for
none of them could use
scientists.
a computer. But it was quite a long time ago. It was in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. But that reminds me about the first time I taught Excel Advanced. And I was in a training, I worked for a training company. I went into the room and at the beginning of the day, we had a flip chart and we did everybody's, well, their name, what they did as a job and what they wanted to get out of the course. And they were all statisticians and heads of departments. And maths is not my strong suit. Excel is great, but maths is not. And the first break, I went out the room to the trainer corner, and I thought, "How am I going to get through this?" But it's all mindset. And at the end of the day, they actually didn't know the stuff that I was teaching them. And when I showed them the statistical abilities, I mean, not that I knew what they did, but or why they would want to use them, but they did. But they didn't know they were there. So that was quite a valuable lesson, actually. And I think can translate for assistants as well. You might think that you are not very good at something or that you don't know, but the person you're doing it for can't do it. So you're the expert, you're the hero.
Yeah.
As Gail said, the hero without a cape. So, so what did you do in the criminal? I'm going back to that because that's the bit that I'm sure everybody is really intrigued by. So, were you training or helping them? What were you doing with the people in those settings?
I was doing face-to-face training with the offenders themselves. So I would have a group, I would do some group work, I would do one-to-one mentoring. I worked with people coming through the Caledonian Project, which is the or at the time was the Scottish project for people that were perpetrating domestic violence. So I had to deal with lots of anger issues. I used hypnosis and acupuncture actually, because that's another of the things that I've learned as I've grown up is doing acupuncture and hypnosis. And I used that for people that were coming off heroin, people that were dealing with anger issues, all of the sort of major stresses that make crimes happen. So I did quite a lot of training. I also developed several training programs for people that wanted to do things like, for example, work on a building site. So I delivered health and safety in a construction environment. You have to have in the UK, you have to have a green card to be a labourer on a construction site that says that health and safety. That was one of the things that we developed. And it's kind of difficult to do that in prison because your time is very
Yeah.
limited because all of the prisoners have to move and then have to move again and they all have to move at the same time. And then and you don't have computers in the prison. Well, you have computers, but you don't have access to the internet unless you have approval. So it's very difficult. And even things like working with scissors. So if you want to make a poster with your learners, glue, scissors, things like that, you have to count your pens in and out. It's very restricted, but I enjoyed it.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. And that's really a really good training ground, if you like, for the things that
Mm.
you've gone on to do later, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
being a trainer, you could probably pick up as long as you can learn it and teach anything to anybody having worked with those challenging situations.
Mhm.
And but what I know, Gail and I know each other through a community called Trainer Talk, where we're both been members for quite a few years. And it's a great supportive community for trainers. Like all of you assistants have different assistant networks. You've got Strategic PA Network, you've got Amanda Johnson's VA Network, Haley Hudson's network. So there are all these different networks where you can go and meet your tribe and everybody understands. For assistants, it might be how do I deal with a challenging boss, executive? And for us, it might be how do we deal with a challenging participant? Many of those. But what Gail's been doing and how I've kind of got in is production, producing producing meetings. So I'll explain what it is. So I've recently been doing this for an organization. They have a global organization. They need to get all of their people all around the world trained up in diversity and inclusion and also creating trust across cultures. There were two different courses and they had to be delivered all over the place. And you had various people as participants. Some of them would be scientists, some of them would be engineers, some of them would be salespeople. And the facilitator, he's got his slide deck that he has to go through. He knows what he needs to get across. But because it's virtual, and in this case, Microsoft Teams, there needed to be time for breakout rooms so people could do individual group work or just have a chat that's not in the main meeting. And a couple of other things, running a poll. And as a facilitator, when I'm delivering, I do all of that myself. So I deliver my stuff and I run the polls. And if I need breakouts, I set up the breakouts and I just kind of do it. And what being a producer made me realize is how much easier my life would be when I was training if I had a producer. That's what you've been doing for quite a while now, Gail, isn't it? Producing.
Yes, nearly 5 years, Shelley. I mean, I do quite a lot of different things. I do production, I do internal verification and assessing for accredited qualifications. I do facilitation and design as well. So my current focus really is on bringing all of that management experience together into a new virtual intelligent leadership transformation program where I train and mentor first line managers to increase competence and confidence in leading a team. But we're here to talk about the other arm of my business, that of virtual technical production, right, Shelley?
Oh, we can
And
talk about both. We can talk about both. But let's talk about the production first.
you asked me how I first got into virtual delivery. And Shelley, I always swore that I would never leave the in-person classroom because I loved the hugs and high fives that you get in the classroom. And I loved doing it. But in 2020, everything changed. So I caught the first wave of COVID in the UK. I honestly thought I was going to die. I was that ill. But even without lockdown, I was literally too ill to deliver much training. But I had an opportunity to learn virtual technical production for a training company in the States, same one that you've been working for. and I became one of their producers. So I've been doing that for coming up to 5 years now, in addition to delivering training and facilitation, doing training design and being an internal quality assurance, as I said. So that's how
Wow.
I got into it.
Yeah, and we were talking before we came on air that actually producing, being behind the scenes, is quite hard work and quite stressful because some of the time you're kind of just sitting there listening. And if you've been producing the same session over and over again, kind of zone out a little bit. We play a game on your phone when everything's on mute until you need to be active, and then it's like, oh, I've got to do this. It is quite intense. But you mentioned that you're developing a new leadership program. So tell me about that, and who is it aimed at? Before we do that, let's just step back one step to the assistants, because the reason I wanted to bring Gail on to talk about the virtual production side of things was that I know that many assistants in large organizations get asked to run large meetings. And they are using, for example, Microsoft Teams or Zoom all day long, every day, and are very familiar with that. On a personal, I can create a meeting, have 10 people in it, it's fine. But the minute you need to present and have other interactive elements going on, it does get quite stressful. And I was thinking that if we should make our assistants more aware of the fact that it's available. Yes, it's something you're going to have to pay for on top of the training, but it's definitely will make the training experience smoother for both the facilitator and the participants. Has that been your experience? Because that's what I think.
100%. And one of the things I say is if you chase two rabbits, you're going to catch neither. So lean into what you're very good at. So if you're a trainer, lean into the training. If you're a producer, lean into the production. They're very different roles, but they work extremely well together. If you're a trainer and you consider the producer as a co-pilot, it's much easier to deliver very interactive training. Because, so for example, Shelley, you just spoke about breakouts. What if you had a full day and you wanted to really make things up, but you wanted it to be intentional? Let's say, for example, you were doing something like DISC or insights or tilt on the personality profiles. In one breakout, you might want everybody who's yellow together, everyone who's blue together, everyone who's green together, etc. So it's very difficult to do that while you're delivering training because you have a spreadsheet of, say, 30 people and you're having to allocate them. It's impossible to do that on the fly and look slick while you're doing it. So if you think of the producer in the background doing all of that while you're delivering your training, you know that the moment you say, okay, let's open the rooms, they're in the right places. The nice thing about that is that the second breakout, you can allocate between all of the rooms, one green, one blue, one red, one yellow in each different room. And then the next one, you can say, okay, we'll have all of the people from Germany together, all the people from Spain together. And these abilities to do your rooms like that make it so much more intentional than just going random selection.
Yeah.
And people are with people, and there's no real rhyme or reason as to why I'm sitting in that particular breakout with that particular person.
Yeah.
So if you think about it like that, when you're designing or when you're a producer and you work with a facilitator, think about how much better you can make things.
And I think that's really important to you listening out there when your executive says to you, okay, HR have been on at me and we need to do X, Y, Z, diversity and inclusion training, cultural training, mental health training, whatever kind of training it is, then do have a think about, does the training company you're working with use a producer to make it more slick, especially if it's a very large group as well. I know when I was doing my few sessions that I was helping somebody out, that the allocation of people, we had to put people in China, in Germany, in Russia, wherever they were, they all had to go in the rooms together. So it was quite a lot to do. And you might be the person asked to do it as well. If you're an assistant, somebody is going to assume that you're an assistant, the package, you can do it. And to be quite honest, it isn't just like that. Well, that's what I've noticed anyway. So tell me about your new program that you're putting together, Gail. And who's it aimed at?
Oh,
Why
my
should
new
they go
program.
on it? That kind of stuff.
Shelley, I'm so excited because I've been delivering a wide range of training for many years. I've been involved in accreditation, in production, etc. I've also been in management. When I worked in criminal justice, I had to manage 13 projects, 26 staff, scattered across all of Scotland. So I'm used to doing things like that. And what I wanted to do was bring all of that together. And the new program is aimed at first level managers. So people who are really on the front line. It's aimed at people who have maybe been an individual contributor or team member and have been promoted because they're very good at their job. When you get promoted because you're good at your job, you suddenly find yourself in a position where you're not using the same skills. So what got you there is not going to get you there, if that makes sense. And a lot of people struggle with that transition where they were part of the team, they had their friends, and now they have to manage the friends. Oh my gosh, the relationships have changed. Suddenly there have to be challenging conversations. How do I delegate? How do I manage performance? And also, I work a lot with the tech industry. Think back to where I started out. I was working with scientists and engineers. Even now, as a virtual trainer or facilitator, I work a lot with companies that are in the technology industry. And for them, it can be quite difficult moving from something that requires a lot of technical skills to something that requires a lot of people skill. And I'm not saying that engineers or STEM people aren't people. They quite often are, but they might not have had to use it in a work context. So providing them with the tools for that is really important because you can Google stuff, you can have a look at it, but the program that I have is not just the training, it's the mentoring. There's one-to-one mentoring sessions with me. There's homework so that it's blended learning. They will take the tool, they will use it in the job, they will come back and they'll say, this is how it went. There's going to be a lot of self-reflection and there's going to be peer support. The cohort's going to be very small, maximum of 8 people, and they will have a Slack group where they all sit and talk to each other and compare notes on how things went and provide advice and support to each other.
Wow,
So
that
I'm
sounds
really excited about this.
yeah. That sounds amazing. And it also sounds to me like it would suit an assistant who's suddenly promoted from being a PA to the next level up, or an EA and then given a team to manage where they've not had to manage a team of assistants before as well.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
100%.
think, yeah, all of those skills are really valuable. So when are you planning to launch this $50 million question?
Early 2025, VILT has just gained accreditation with CPD, which is massively exciting. I actually just announced that on LinkedIn today. So we're good to go with that. But obviously, things take time. It's quite a big program. I'm still busy refining it and tweaking it. But yeah, early 2025. And you can always get hold of me either on LinkedIn or at Gayle, Gayle, at Vilt, VILT.co.uk. And happy the first person to know when it's coming out and what the plans are.
That's fantastic. I shall be watching your LinkedIn like a hawk now till it's announced. So, Gail, that's really just been a really fascinating chat. And I'm sure even though we haven't talked about assistant centric things today, that there is a lot of valuable content there that our assistants can take away and just have a break from being an assistant for 25 minutes or so, or however long we've been chatting. I did say at the beginning that this was a bit self-indulgent for me, getting to talk to one of my trainer buddies for 20 minutes and bore you all to pieces. Hopefully not bore you all to pieces. So yeah, so Gail, do you have any tips for our assistants, just drawing on your varied experience of all the different things that you've done? And the one thing that has come up in nearly every episode that I've recorded so far is that change is the only constant. So what tips have you got to enable a bit more resilience and to help people deal with that constant change?
So let's first talk about the difference between being a facilitator and being a producer. As a facilitator or trainer, you're the magician on the stage, you're wowing people with your knowledge and your skills and your expertise. As a producer, you're the person behind the curtain, pulling all of those levers to make magic happen. So it's a more technical role, and many producers are not learning and development professionals. Lots of them come from admin backgrounds, just like your listeners, Shelley. So the types of events that I'm involved in as a producer are usually training workshops or larger events. For example, I produced for the Training Designers Club Summit a couple of times. I've also been involved in some hybrid production, which is where some attendees are virtual and others are in the same physical room. And that sometimes means working closely with audiovisual technicians or producers who are in the physical room. So you've asked what tips I can offer, and you mentioned nothing being so constant as change. So first, know the platform. They get changed regularly. There's constant updates. And while most of those changes are minor, some can come as quite a shock. I remember being a facilitator for a big multinational tech company about a year ago. It was a 3-day event. And the night before, I logged into my WebEx platform to make sure that the link worked okay. Well, the link worked fine. But for a moment, I stared at WebEx and I thought, did I log into Zoom by mistake? That's how different the platform looked, literally overnight, and how the tools changed. And some of those tools disappeared. No warning. Luckily, I had an amazing producer. Shout out to Nikhil. And together we changed the training design while we were delivering the training. Every time there was a breakout, we were looking at the next section and going, okay, we need to change those annotation arrows for chat message. We can't slide up pull open while we're doing a countdown timer using the app. Don't change that. Can you share a Google camera instead? That is the kind of producer facilitator relationship that we need. Which brings me to tip number 2. Create a safe professional space for your facilitator. Be warm, be organized, be supportive. If you've never heard of the term psychological safety, I urge you to look into it. You need to create that environment of trust and safety where you have each other's back without judgment, where you both feel safe to mess up without criticism, where you can ask for help in a crisis, where you, as a producer, might need to step out of your role in order to do something to help. So, for example, you might be asked, oh my gosh, can you quickly create this document or slide? Anything that helps make things easier for the facilitator or the participant. Number 3, look through the program design. Now, some of these are really detailed and complex, which is amazing. Others give almost no information. So this is what I do. I open a OneNote or a Word document. I go through the program design and I create my own producer wireframe. So for example, something really simple. For example, slide 6, breakout, 6 groups, 20 minutes. Slide 14, 5-minute break, countdown timer. Slide 21, type such and such in the chat. I also create a list of alignment points. So these are questions that I want to ask the facilitators, any clarifications needed, any platform changes that they should know about beforehand. I offer facilitators a rehearsal session. This is where you can spend an hour or two, depending on how big the workshop or the event's going to be. You can spend some time going through the run of show, who is doing what, and when, ask your alignment questions, get any clarifications needed. You should always open the platform 30 minutes prior to the live session and ask your facilitators to do the same, because this gives you time to do any tech checks, ensure that they can share the screen, that you can hear any sound on any videos they're playing, check polls are working, get any clarifications, etc. But this is also an opportunity to get to know the facilitator and develop a relationship, as well as boost that psychological safety that I was speaking about. This also gives you and the producer time to get to your place of calm so that you can be at your best and take that deep breath. Now, during the session, I suggest you have that slide deck open and have it on another screen, ready to share in case the facilitator has a problem. Also have a browser open, because if the facilitator mentions a book, an author, a YouTube video, you can quickly look it up, grab the link and put that into the chat. This is major added value, and this is the thing that will set you aside from most other producers out there who just stick to what they've been specifically asked to do. So those are my top tips. These are very quick wins for you. Is there anything else that you want to know on this, Shelley?
No, I think that's great. And I think if any of our assistants out there are asked to be the producer for their executive, their coworker, their client, they would do well to remember your tips and have a think about what they need to do beforehand. Because it isn't just about going in and turning up at the meeting and running through a few slides. It's a lot more than that. So, Gayle, thank you ever so much for coming on Virtually Amazing Assistants, the podcast for assistants everywhere. And this episode is actually, according to my spreadsheet over there, going to go out on the 25th of March. So there's some time for me to play with the video editing here and get it all scheduled nicely.
I would just like to add something. I am very happy to be connected with on LinkedIn. And if you do connect with me, please send me DM, ask me. I have some free resources I have on technical production and how best to support your facilitator. So you can connect with me and just ask. I'll just send it to you. You can also email me if you want at Gayle, that's Gayle, at VILT, and I'll email those to you as well. Don't be shy. I love to make new connections, and it's my gift to you. So
That's
thank you very
great.
much for having me, Shelley.
Oh, you're very welcome. As trainers, we'll just talk to anybody, really, won't we? We'll just talk to anybody. Yeah, just connect. And that's a good reminder, actually, for me to say to our listeners, if you haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, please do. And go and have a look at virtuallyaমাzingassistants.com, the website, and also the YouTube channel, because this podcast goes out on video as well as on audio. And so that's it from me for this week. And I'll see you next week with another amazing guest.